Like most wars, World War II is often thought of as a single war that began with two clearly defined sides and ended in one side defeating the other. But when we take a closer look at history, we can see that in reality, World War II began as a series of smaller conflicts scattered all over the globe. Over several years, these small conflicts merged into the larger conflict that we know today as the Second World War. We often think of the war beginning in Europe, but we must first begin in Asia. In East Asia, the war began in 1931 when Japan invaded northern China. By 1937, Japan had conquered a large part of China. The United States and Great Britain offered aid to the Chinese. Dozens of American pilots, called Flying Tigers, were sent to China to help fight the Japanese. In 1935, conflict in the West began when Italy invaded Ethiopia. The Ethiopians fought back bravely, but no one came to help them. Great Britain refused to get involved. Italy also conquered other areas around the Mediterranean Sea, threatening British colonies in Africa and the Middle East. A surprise came in 1939 when Germany and the Soviet Union signed a treaty promising peace between the two nations. Within weeks of each other, Germany and Russia both invaded Poland and split the country in two. Poland had found itself caught helplessly between its two threatening neighbors. As German tanks rolled across the border, Great Britain and France finally declared war on Germany. Now that war had been declared, Great Britain came to the aid of the Ethiopians in Africa. Australia soon stepped in also to help Britain and France fight against Germany and Italy. The Germans also came to Africa to aid their allies, the Italians, and soon overran all of North Africa, and by 1940 had surrounded Egypt. In 1939, Russia also made more advances by invading the Baltic nations of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. But again, no one was in a position to help them. The tiny nations struggled in vain to hold back the Russian invaders. In 1940, Russia also invaded Finland, who had joined Great Britain in opposing the Germans. Now they were caught in the middle, just as the Polish were. In May of that year, Germany turned west and invaded France. In only a few weeks, Paris had fallen. For months, Great Britain tried desperately to defend itself and to free its conquered allies in Europe. But by the end of 1940, the Axis powers of Italy and Germany had spread throughout all of Europe. Great Britain stood alone. Russia and the United States refused to get involved. Through 1941, Great Britain still stood alone. All other nations in Europe had been conquered or were neutral. In June of 1941, Germany broke their treaty and launched a surprise invasion of Russia. Great Britain and the United States promised aid to Russia, but there was little they could do. But soon the US would find itself involved in an unexpected way. In December of 1941, Japan launched an attack on Pearl Harbor. At the same time, Japan also attacked the French and British colonies in Southeast Asia. The Japanese also attacked the Philippines soon after Pearl Harbor, and the Americans were forced to surrender the islands. The day after Pearl Harbor, President Roosevelt signed the declaration of war against Japan. A few days later, the US joined the war in Europe by declaring war against Germany. The US fought back as soon as it recovered from the attacks, and came out in full support of Great Britain, France, China, and Russia. Now the war was finally divided between the Axis and the Allies. But the first few months were tough on the Allies. By April 1942, Japan had spread throughout the entire Western Pacific, and Germany still controlled most of Europe and had nearly reached Moscow. It took another year for the Allies to turn the tide. The war lasted another 3 years, until Germany, Japan, and Italy were all defeated.